She secretly gave a help signal in the restaurant. Mafia boss saw it and followed. The linen tablecloth was so stiff, it felt like it could slice my skin. Everything at Viver Ristorante was designed to broadcast wealth, from the heavy, ice-cold silverware to the crystal glasses that refracted the low, amber light. It was the kind of place where people spoke in whispers, but their whispers cost more than my old apartment's rent for a year. Across from me, Brandon Callister smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. His eyes were Arctic blue, flat and possessive. "You haven't touched your risotto, Eva," he murmured. His voice was smooth, cultured, the kind that charmed senators and bank presidents. To me, it was the sound of a lock clicking shut. "Chef Bianchi made it especially for you." I forced my hand, which felt brittle and cold, to lift the spoon. "It's lovely. Brandon, I'm just taking in the atmosphere." "Good. You should." He leaned forward, the faint scent of his expensive cologne, all sandalwood and control, washing over me. "It's where you belong, not in that dusty, paint-splattered hovel you used to call a studio. You're an artist, Eva, but you need the right patron." His fingers brushed my knuckles, and I had to fight the urge to flinch. His touch was proprietary, like he was checking the quality of a purchase. He had bought my canvases, my time, my silence. He thought he had bought me. "You've been quiet today," he continued, his thumb drawing a slow, cold circle on the back of my hand. "I hope you aren't feeling ungrateful. I've invested a great deal in your comfort, in your brother's comfort." There it was, the veiled threat, the invisible chain pulled taut around my throat. Aiden, my younger brother, navigating his first year of college, blissfully unaware that his tuition was being paid by a monster, and that his safety depended entirely on my compliance. I tried to breathe, the stays of the corset under my silk dress, a dress he'd picked out, dug into my ribs. "Of course not. Brandon, I'm very grateful." "Good." He settled back, satisfied. My gaze drifted, desperate for any distraction, and found a table in the corner. It was occupied by 4 men. All in dark, impeccably tailored suits, they were silent. Unlike the boisterous finance types at the bar, they sat with a stillness that was unnerving, a pocket of shadow in the warm room. One man sat facing my direction, though he wasn't looking at me. He was listening to the man beside him, his expression neutral. He was younger than Brandon, perhaps in his late 30s, but he possessed an authority that Brandon, for all his polished bluster, lacked. Where Brandon's power was a performance, this man's power was a fact, like gravity. He had dark hair, a strong Sicilian profile, and a chilling, cold charisma. He exuded a quiet danger that made the air around him seem thinner. My heart gave a strange, painful kick. Brandon was looking at his phone, scrolling through market reports. His attention was, for a precious few seconds, diverted. It was a stupid impulse, a desperate, childish wish. I knew about the signal. I'd seen it on a social media post months ago, a lifeline for women in situations just like mine. A silent scream. My hands were in my lap, hidden by the tablecloth. My purse was on my knee, pretending to adjust the strap. I lifted my right hand slightly. I tucked my thumb into my palm. My fingers, trembling so hard I thought I might be sick, folded down one by one, trapping the thumb. I held it for 3 seconds, my eyes fixed on the man in the corner. Then he looked up. His eyes were not blue like Brandon's. They were dark, almost black, and they met mine across the room. There was no flicker of surprise, no confusion. He simply saw it. Time didn't slow down. It stopped. The clatter of plates, the murmur of conversation, the faint buzz of Brandon's phone. It all went silent. He saw my hand. He saw the signal. His gaze held mine, unblinking. I saw a flash of something in their depths. Not pity, but a dark, cold recognition. It terrified me almost as much as Brandon did. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible tilt of his head to the man on his left. The other man looked at me, then at Brandon, then back to his boss. The man in the dark suit, the one who held my gaze, gave a slow, deliberate blink. Then he returned his attention to his wine glass, as if I didn't exist. The air rushed back into my lungs. I dropped my hand, my skin slick with sweat. What had I done? "Hey, idiot!" Brandon snapped. Not at me, but at his phone. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping rudely against the floor. "I have to take this. Stay here. Don't move." He strode away toward the vestibule, his voice already rising in controlled anger as he berated someone on the other end. I sat paralyzed. I had signaled a stranger, a dangerous stranger. I needed to leave, to get to the restroom, to hide. But before I could move, the man from the corner was standing by my table. He moved with a fluid, silent grace, like a panther. He was taller up close, and the tailored suit couldn't hide the strength in his shoulders. He didn't look at me. He looked over my head, toward the exit, as if lost. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was low, a soft gravel that vibrated with a faint, residual accent from the old world. "I'm looking for the Carlisle Hotel. My driver seems to be turned around. Do you know if it is far from here?" I stared at him, my throat closed. The Carlisle was 20 blocks north. It was the worst lie I'd ever heard. He bent slightly, lowering his head as if to hear my response, bringing his face closer to mine, shielding his words from the rest of the room. The scent of him was nothing like Brandon's. It was clean, sharp, like expensive soap and cold night air. His dark eyes finally met mine. "Do you need help?" The question was so soft, so direct, it bypassed all my defenses. It was not a pickup line. It was an offer, a transaction. Tears burned the back of my eyes. I couldn't speak. I could only manage the smallest, most fractional nod, a single dip of my chin. He stared at me for 1 second longer, his expression hardening, as if my nod had confirmed a terrible truth. He straightened up instantly. "My apologies for bothering you," he said, his voice returning to a polite, neutral volume. He turned and walked back to his table. Sliding into his seat, the entire exchange had taken less than 15 seconds. When Brandon returned to the table 5 minutes later, fuming about incompetence, the corner table was empty, their bill was paid, and the men were gone. Brandon grabbed my elbow. "We're leaving." The ride home was tense. Brandon's anger simmered, radiating off him in the confined space of the Maybach. He hated when his calls were interrupted, hated when things didn't go his way. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped in my lap, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I lived in a glass tower overlooking Central Park. Brandon called it our penthouse, but it was his. The doorman, the elevator, the keypad code, all of it was his. It was the most beautiful prison in New York. As we pulled up to the curb, a black sedan idled across the street. I only glimpsed it for a second before Brandon was pulling me out of the car, but I saw the driver. It was the man who had been sitting to the left of the stranger. I didn't look back. Upstairs, Brandon poured himself a brandy, his back to me. "You were distracted tonight, Eva. I don't like it." "I'm just tired," I whispered, my voice sounding weak. "Go to bed," he ordered, not turning. "I have work to do." I escaped to the bedroom, the thick carpet swallowing the sound of my footsteps. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the street, 30 floors below. The black sedan was still there. It sat like a piece of the night, waiting. My fear of Brandon was a cold, constant thing, but this new feeling, the one sparked by the man with the dark eyes, was hot and sharp. I didn't know if he was a savior or a different kind of monster. I just knew he had followed. Lorenzo DeMarco did not like complications. His world was built on order, loyalty, and the precise application of control. The woman in the restaurant was a complication he should have ignored. But he had seen the signal, and he had seen the ghost of his sister, Maria, in the woman's terrified eyes. Maria, who had died in a state-run foster home, her bruises explained away by accidents, while Lorenzo was trapped in juvenile detention, powerless. He never allowed himself to be powerless again. He sat in his study, the city lights far below him, a glass of water on his desk. He hadn't touched the whiskey. He needed a clear head. His underboss, Nico, stood opposite him. Nico was the only one of his men who had been with him since the beginning. "The plate belongs to a Maybach," Nico said, his voice low. "Registered to Callister Holdings. The man is Brandon Callister. New money, but deep roots. Tech, real estate, and heavy political donations. The kind of man who has dinner with the mayor." Lorenzo stared at the high-definition photo Nico had placed on the desk. It was taken from the street, showing Eva and Brandon entering the penthouse. "And her?" Lorenzo asked. "Eva Monroe, 26, artist, mostly watercolors and mixed media, quiet stuff. She had a small show in Brooklyn about a year ago, got some minor press, then about 8 months ago, she dropped off the map, closed her studio. Around the same time, Callister started buying her work for insane prices." "He's laundering money," Lorenzo said. It wasn't a question. "Looks like it. Using her art to move cash. But there's something else." Nico slid another paper across the desk. "She filed a police report against him 3 months ago. Domestic assault, harassment." Lorenzo looked up, his eyes cold. "And?" "It vanished. Vanished completely. I still have the contact at the precinct, the one who owes me. He said the file was flagged, moved to a detective in organized crime, and then digitally wiped. The arresting officer was transferred to Staten Island 2 days later." Lorenzo leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning softly. Callister wasn't just an abusive boyfriend. He was organized, with connections deep enough to make the NYPD look the other way. "He's got her trapped," Lorenzo said quietly. "More than you know," Nico said. "She has a younger brother, Aiden Monroe, attends NYU, full scholarship. We're checking the source of the grant now, but I bet my right hand it traces back to Callister." Lorenzo closed his eyes. The chain was complete. The art, the money, the brother. Brandon Callister hadn't just caged her. He'd built the cage out of the things she loved. "She tried to run," Lorenzo murmured, remembering the desperation in that hand signal. "Yes, she had, 3 months ago. The memory was seared into my mind, a brand of failure. It had been after he'd destroyed my paintings. Not all of them. Just the ones I'd painted before I met him. He'd come into the studio I kept in the penthouse, drunk on wine and power, and decided they were sentimental clutter. He hadn't ripped them. He'd carefully, methodically, painted over them with thick black gesso. 'We need a clean canvas. Eva,' he'd said, smiling. That night, I packed a single bag. I took the emergency credit card I kept hidden and I ran. I made it to Port Authority, my heart hammering, my hands shaking. I bought a ticket to anywhere. I was waiting for the bus, hiding in the crowd, when my phone buzzed. It was a picture from Brandon. It was Aiden, sitting in the NYU library, headphones on, studying. He was unaware of the man taking the photo from the next aisle over. The text beneath it read, "He looks so focused. It would be a shame to interrupt his education. Come home, Eva." I stood at the bus terminal for 10 minutes. Then I turned around, walked out, and took a cab back to the penthouse. When I walked in, Brandon was sitting on the sofa, reading the paper. "Welcome home," he'd said, not looking up. "I trust you got the cold air you needed." He never mentioned it again. He never had to. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Brandon leaving. When he was flying to Zurich for a 48-hour finance meeting, the moment the heavy front door clicked shut, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. I was in the kitchen, making coffee. When my personal phone buzzed, it was an email. "The Gallerist Foundation is pleased to invite you to a private viewing for the Soho Rising Artists Initiative. We have been following your early work and would be honored if you would bring your portfolio for a private consultation today at 1 p.m. My heart stopped. My early work? No one cared about my early work. Brandon had buried it. The address was a small, exclusive gallery downtown. It was a trap. It had to be. Brandon was testing me. But he was in Zurich. I'd watched him leave. Was it him? The man from the restaurant? The hope was so sharp, so painful. I almost doubled over. Hope was a luxury I could not afford. It was the one thing Brandon hadn't been able to take from me, and the one thing that could get Aiden killed. But I was so tired of being afraid. I told the doorman I was going to the art supply store. I grabbed my old portfolio, the one I kept hidden under the bed, filled with sketches and photos of my pre-Brandon work. I took a cab, the entire ride. I felt watched. The gallery was small, its windows tinted dark. The door was locked. I knocked. A moment later, it was opened by Nico, the man who had been at the restaurant table. He was built like a heavyweight boxer, but his eyes were calm. "Miss Monroe, we've been expecting you." The gallery was empty. No art, no consultants, just white walls and echoing silence. And him, Lorenzo DeMarco, was standing in the center of the room, looking at a blank wall, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned as I entered. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was the same as last night, low, calm, solid. "Who are you?" My voice was a reedy whisper. My portfolio case felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "My name is Lorenzo. It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that you asked for help." I shouldn't have," I stammered, backing toward the door. Nico was still standing there, blocking the exit. "You filed a police report 3 months ago," Lorenzo said, ignoring my panic. "Assault, it disappeared. The officer who took your statement is now directing traffic in Tottenville. The man you are with, Brandon Callister, is not just a businessman. He is a criminal who believes he is above the law. He is wrong." I stared at him. He knew. He knew about the report. He didn't just buy your art, Miss Monroe. He's using it to launder millions in illicit funds. He has you trapped. I know about your brother, Aiden. The portfolio dropped from my hand, hitting the hardwood floor with a loud slap. I staggered, grabbing the wall for support. No, oh God, no. If he knew about Aiden, then Aiden was in more danger. Lorenzo took a step toward me. I flinched. He stopped immediately, holding up a hand. "I am not him. I will not hurt you. I am offering you protection, a way out, for you and for your brother." "Protection?" I laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "You don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of. If I disappear, he won't just look for me. He will go straight to Aiden. He will destroy him just to prove he can. I can protect your brother, too." "You can't!" I was shouting now, the tears I'd held back for months finally breaking free. "You can't be with him every second. You don't understand. Brandon doesn't just have bodyguards. He has politicians. He has police. He owns everything. If I run, he will kill him. He will kill him, and he will tell me it's my fault." I wiped my face, furious at my weakness. "I can't. I'm sorry I bothered you. I made a mistake." I bent to grab my portfolio, but my hands were shaking too badly. Lorenzo knelt, retrieved it, and handed it to me. His fingers brushed mine. They were warm. "Eva." He said my name for the first time, and it sounded different in his mouth. Solid, real. "Fear is a cage. He locked you in it. Only you can walk out." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, slim burner phone. "He's in Zurich for 2 days, but he is watching you. When you are ready, call this number. It will only work once." I looked at the phone. It was a choice. A terrible, impossible choice. I snatched it from him. "Leave me alone! Leave us alone!" I turned and ran. Nico moved aside, and I burst out of the gallery, gasping for air, the phone feeling like a block of ice in my hand. I ran all the way back to the penthouse. I hid the phone in my portfolio case. I scrubbed my face, fixed my makeup, and waited. I was a coward. I had chosen the cage. That night, I tried to paint, but my hands shook. Lorenzo's words echoed in the empty apartment. "Only you can walk out." I was cleaning my brushes when I heard the keypad at the front door. My blood turned to ice. It was 8 p.m. Brandon wasn't due back for another day. The door opened. He stood there, his face a mask of cold fury, his overcoat still on. "Zurich was postponed," he said, his voice deadly calm. He walked toward me, sniffing the air. You smell like the street. Where did you go?" "Eva?" I went to the art store for supplies." "Did you?" He smiled, and my stomach clenched. He walked past me, into my studio, and saw the portfolio case by the easel, the one I'd taken to the gallery. "You've been holding out on me," he said softly, flipping the case open. "What's this? Old work?" He sifted through the sketches, and then he found it. The burner phone. He picked it up between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were something filthy. "What?" he whispered. "Is this?" "I don't know," I lied, my voice trembling. "I found it, on the street." He looked at me, and he knew I was lying. "Who gave it to you? Eva?" "No one. Brandon, please." "Was it the men in the restaurant? Did one of them approach you when I was on my call?" My silence was all the answer he needed. His face contorted, the cultivated charm vanished, replaced by a raw, ugly rage. "After everything I've given you," he hissed, advancing on me, "you are mine. You don't look at other men. You don't talk to other men. You don't take things from other men." He raised his hand. I flinched, expecting the familiar, painful grip on my arm, the bruising squeeze. Instead, his open palm cracked across my face. The sound was sharp, shocking, echoing in the sterile room. My head snapped to the side, my cheek exploding in white-hot pain. I stumbled back, tasting copper. He had never hit my face before, never left a mark that couldn't be hidden. I stared at him, stunned, my hand flying to my cheek. He looked at his own hand, equally stunned, and then his expression hardened with satisfaction. He had broken a final taboo, and he had liked it. "Now," he said, breathing hard, "you're going to tell me exactly who he is." He turned his back, walking to the bar to pour a drink, savoring his victory. But the slap hadn't broken me. It had woken me up. The shock cut through the fog of my fear. The pain was a clarification. He would never stop. He would hit me again, and one day, he would decide I wasn't worth the trouble. And then he would go after Aiden. Lorenzo was right, it was a cage. While Brandon's back was turned, while the sound of bourbon pouring into a glass filled the silence, I moved. I didn't grab a coat. I didn't grab my shoes. I ran. I wrenched open the studio door and sprinted through the living room. "Eva!" Brandon roared, spilling his drink. I hit the heavy front door, fumbled with the deadbolt, and ripped it open. I plunged into the private stairwell, ignoring the elevator. I ran down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete, 30 flights. I heard the penthouse door crash open above me, heard him bellow my name. I heard the ding of the elevator being called, but I was already 10 flights down. I ran, my lungs on fire, the adrenaline and terror a toxic cocktail in my veins. My cheek throbbed. I burst into the lobby, past a shocked doorman. "Miss Monroe, stop!" I hit the revolving door and spilled onto the cold pavement of Central Park South. The city noise was a physical blow. People stared at the woman in the silk pajamas, barefoot, one side of her face already swelling. I didn't care. I flagged the first taxi I saw, diving into the back seat. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror, wide with alarm. I realized I didn't have the phone. Brandon still had it. I gave him the address of the only place I could think of, the address from the email, the gallery in Soho. "Please," I sobbed, my body finally succumbing to the shakes. "Please, just drive." As the cab pulled away from the curb, I looked back. Brandon was standing under the awning of the penthouse, his face a mask of pure fury, his phone to his ear. He was watching me go, and he was already making a call. I huddled in the back seat, shaking. I had run, but I had run from one monster, and now I was running straight to another. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his expression a mix of pity and fear. I was a ghost in his back seat, barefoot, in silk pajamas, with the left side of my face beginning to bloom in a painful, purple swell. He probably thought I was a junkie or a prostitute escaping a bad John. He didn't know I'd just fled a prison 30 floors high. When we pulled up to the gallery in Soho, it was dark. The street was empty. "Lady, there ain't nobody here," the driver said, his hand hovering over the meter. My blood ran cold. Of course. It was a fake event, a one-time lure. He'd said the phone would only work once. He must have assumed I'd call. I hadn't. I'd been a coward. And now I was alone on a dark street, and Brandon was hunting me. I started to sob, my body overwhelmed by the adrenaline crash. I don't have any money." "Just get out of the cab," he sighed, unlocking the door. I stumbled out, my bare feet hitting the frigid pavement. The cab sped away, leaving me in the shadows. I was pressing myself into the gallery's cold doorway, trying to become invisible, when a black sedan pulled silently to the curb. The passenger window glided down. It was Nico, the man who had opened the gallery door hours ago. "Get in, Miss Monroe," he said, his voice flat. I didn't hesitate. I ripped the back door open and fell inside. The car smelled of new leather and metal. Nico didn't look at me as he pulled away from the curb, his movements smooth and professional. "He's in Queens," Nico said, navigating the empty downtown streets. "He knew you wouldn't call. He said you'd have to be broken first." A shiver went through me, he knew. Where did you come from?" I whispered. "We never left," Nico said, his eyes on the road. "He's had a car in your building since you left the gallery this afternoon." We drove over the bridge, leaving the glittering spires of Manhattan, Brandon's world, behind. Queens was different. It was real. The buildings were brick and steel, not glass and ego. We pulled into an underground garage beneath an unassuming, pre-war apartment building. Nico led me to a freight elevator, which opened directly into a sprawling apartment. The door slid shut, the sound a heavy, final thud. Lorenzo DeMarco was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. He turned, and his dark eyes immediately found my face. I saw his jaw tighten, a single muscle flexing in anger. He didn't look surprised. He looked grimly satisfied, as if I had just confirmed his lowest expectations of the world. "Nico, get the kit," he said, his voice low. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the bone-deep cold and the throbbing, agonizing pain in my cheek. I began to shake violently, my teeth chattering. "Sit," Lorenzo ordered. He didn't guide me. He commanded, and my body obeyed, collapsing onto a heavy leather sofa. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick wool blanket, which he draped over my shoulders. The weight of it was grounding. Nico returned with a metal first aid box and handed it to Lorenzo before melting back into the shadows of the apartment. Lorenzo sat on the coffee table in front of me. He opened the kit. The smell of antiseptic cut through the air. "This is gonna sting," he said. He soaked a cotton pad. I watched his hands. They were large, calloused, and moved with an economy that belied their strength. They were hands that could break things. But as he reached for my face, I saw him consciously gentle them. The moment his fingers brushed my skin, I flinched, scrambling backward into the couch, a small, animal sound of terror escaping my throat. Lorenzo froze. He held his hand up, palm out, the bloodied cotton pad resting in the center. "I am not him," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "I will not hurt you, but that cut needs to be cleaned. Do you understand?" I stared at him, my breathing ragged, and he didn't move. He waited. He was giving me the choice. It was the one thing Brandon never did. Slowly, painfully, I leaned forward. His expression didn't change. He brought his hand back to my face. His touch, impossibly light, his left hand cupped my uninjured cheek, holding my head steady. His thumb was warm against my skin. His right hand worked precisely, cleaning the small cut near my temple where Brandon's ring had connected. It stung, and tears welled, but I held still. He was close enough that I could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. He smelled like soap and night air. "He broke a glass," he observed, his voice a low rumble. I shook my head, my voice thick. My face. His movement stopped for a fraction of a second. His dark eyes burned into mine. He understood. Brandon hadn't hit me in anger. He'd slapped me as a statement. He finished cleaning the cut and applied a small bandage. Then he took an ice pack wrapped in a thin towel and gently pressed it to the swelling on my cheekbone. "Hold this," he said. My fingers were too numb. He sighed, a sound of profound irritation, and sat beside me on the couch. He took my hand and wrapped it around the ice pack, then placed his own hand over mine, holding it firmly in place. We sat in silence for a long time. The warmth of his hand seeped into my frozen skin. "You have to tell me about Aiden," he said finally. The sound of my brother's name broke the dam. The terror, the shame, the helplessness. It all came pouring out. I told him everything. The picture from the library, the scholarship that paid for his dorm and tuition, the veiled threats. I told him how I'd run 3 months ago, and how Brandon had pulled me back with a single text message. "He's the only family I have." I wept, the words muffled by the blanket. "He's just a kid. He thinks I'm living some fairy tale, that I'm selling my paintings and dating a prince. He doesn't know. And Brandon will crush him just to watch me bleed." Lorenzo didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say it would be okay. He just listened, his presence a solid, unmoving wall beside me. When I was finished, the apartment was silent again, save for my shuddering breaths. "My sister was named Maria," he said, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. I looked up. He was staring at the wall opposite us, but his eyes were seeing something far away. "She was 14. I was 17. He spoke in short, clipped sentences, as if pulling the words from his own skin. I was in juvenile detention, a stupid fight, protecting my turf. I thought I was a man. While I was inside, they put her in a new foster home. The man there, he was like your Brandon. Polished, respected." He paused, and his hand tightened over mine, his knuckles white. "She tried to tell the caseworkers. They didn't listen. She tried to tell me, in letters. I told her to be tough. I told her to wait." His voice was raw. "She fell down a flight of stairs 2 weeks before I was released. They ruled it an accident. I was too late." He turned his head, his dark eyes meeting mine. The cold charisma was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient grief. "He uses what you love to control you." Lorenzo said, "I know this. I will not be too late again. Eva, I will find your brother. I will secure him, and only then will we deal with Brandon Callister. You have my word." Later that night, I woke up screaming. I was back in the penthouse, the sound of the slap echoing, Brandon's face looming over me. I sat bolt upright in the guest bed, drenched in sweat, my heart trying to escape my chest. The safe house was dark, the silence absolute. I was alone. The panic was so thick I couldn't breathe. I stumbled out of the bedroom, desperate for... I didn't know what. Lorenzo was in the living room, sitting in the armchair, watching the city. He hadn't been to sleep. A low lamp cast his face in shadow. He's going to find me," I whispered, clutching the blanket around me. "He's going to find Aiden." "He will not," Lorenzo said. "You don't know him. He's everywhere." I collapsed onto the floor, my back against the sofa, and finally, I broke. It wasn't the dignified weeping from earlier. It was an ugly, primal breakdown, the kind that rips from your stomach, a sound of pure despair for everything I had lost, for my art, for my freedom, for my brother. I cried until my throat was raw. Lorenzo didn't move from his chair. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. He just sat, a guardian in the darkness, letting me shatter. His presence a silent promise that I wouldn't be swept away. When the sobs finally subsided into exhausted, hitching breaths, I felt his shadow fall over me. I looked up. He was kneeling in front of me. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, his gaze heavy with the weight of his own dead sister. He reached out, his hand hovering, not at my face, but at my hair, brushing a damp strand away from my temple. His touch was hesitant, respectful. It undid me more than the violence had. The tension in the air shifted. It was no longer just comfort. It was proximity. It was the shared, ugly knowledge of our wounds. I saw his gaze drop to my mouth. I felt my own breath catch. He leaned in, slow, giving me every chance to retreat. I leaned in, too. I was so cold, and he was so warm. I needed, just for 1 second, to feel something that wasn't fear. Our lips were a millimeter apart. I could feel the warmth of his breath. And then I saw Brandon's face. I saw the satisfied smirk as he slapped me. I smelled his cologne. I jerked back, slamming my head against the sofa. I'm sorry. I can't. I was disgusting. I was bruised. I was a victim, and I felt tainted by Brandon's ownership. Lorenzo didn't look angry. He didn't look rejected. He looked like he understood. He nodded. A slow, grave dip of his chin. "Breathe, Eva," he said, standing up. "Go back to bed. No one will find you here." He was right about the security. He was wrong about Brandon not finding me. 3 days later, a loud, official pounding echoed through the apartment. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Nico appeared, motioning for me to stay in the back. Lorenzo didn't even look up from the financial reports he was reading at the dining table. We heard Nico's voice, then other, muffled voices. Nico returned, his face impassive. Detectives from the 19th precinct. My heart stopped. He sent them. He filed a police report, Nico confirmed. Stated you stole $200,000 in jewelry and an unsigned painting. I didn't take anything. We know, Lorenzo said, finally looking up. It's a smart move. He's not reporting you missing. He's reporting you as a common criminal. He's using his police contacts to hunt you. The pounding came again, louder. They have a warrant? Lorenzo asked. No. They're conducting an inquiry at the request of Mr. Callister, Nico said with a sneer. Lorenzo nodded. He picked up his phone and made a call. Armand, I have 2 detectives from the 19th at my Queens property, harassing my guest. Handle it. He hung up. Less than 10 minutes later, a sleek, gray-haired man in a suit worth more than my car arrived. Armand, the lawyer, he spoke to the police in the hallway. We couldn't hear the words, only the tone. Armand's was like sculpted ice. The detectives' voices went from demanding to deferential. 5 minutes later, they were gone. They won't be back, Lorenzo said, turning a page. I stared at him. Brandon had bought the police, but Lorenzo owned them. Nico, Lorenzo said, this changes the timeline. I want to know everything Callister touches. I want to know where his money comes from and where it goes. Tear him apart. Nico nodded. He's dirtier than we thought. The art laundering is just the surface. We're finding ties to international trafficking rings, Eastern Europe. He's not just a bully, he's a snake. The word trafficking hung in the air, cold and vile. A new, sharper fear gripped me. Aiden, I whispered, looking at Lorenzo. We have to get Aiden. Lorenzo's face tightened. It was the first time I had seen him look unsettled. Nico, he said, his voice hard. Nico shook his head grimly. We checked the dorm 2 days ago. Boss, as soon as she got here, he's gone. Callister moved him. His roommate said he transferred to a private research group. He's been moved to an unknown location. The floor fell away. He had him. Brandon had anticipated my every move. He had my brother. I spent the next 2 weeks in a fog. Lorenzo's men were tearing the city apart looking for Aiden, but Brandon had hidden him well. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I just sat staring at the wall, a ghost in Lorenzo's fortress. One afternoon, Lorenzo came into the living room and threw a large paper bag onto the coffee table. Enough, he said. I looked inside, a charcoal sketchbook, pencils of every grade, erasers. I am not running a hospice. Eva, he said, his voice rough. You are an artist. Act like one. Grieve, be angry, be afraid, but do it on the page. Stop disappearing. It's an insult to my protection. It was the cruelest and kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. He was right. I was letting Brandon win. I was letting him kill the artist, too. That night, I opened the sketchbook. I drew the bruise on my face as it faded from purple to yellow. I drew the memory of the revolving door. I drew the fear in Aiden's eyes from the last time I saw him. And I drew Lorenzo. I drew his hands, his profile, the way he sat in the armchair, a pillar of controlled darkness. He would sit with me. He'd work on his laptop, the room silent save for the scratch of my charcoal on the paper and the click of his keys. We began to exist in a shared silence. It was a strange, domestic truce. One night, the rain lashed against the reinforced windows. I was trying to capture the way the light hit the glass. Lorenzo brought me a sketchbook, a new one, bound in leather. "You're almost out of paper," he said, setting it on the table. He didn't leave. He stood behind me, watching me draw. I could feel his body heat, the solid presence of him at my back. "You see things," he murmured, his voice close to my ear, "even in the dark." I turned my head. It was closer than I thought. His gaze wasn't on the drawing. It was on me. "You saved my life," I whispered. "Not yet," he answered, his voice rough. This time, when he leaned in, there was no memory of Brandon. There was no shame. It had been weeks. My face was healed. My hands were steady. I was not a victim. I was an artist. I was angry. And I was staring at the only man who had seen my signal. He put his hand on the wall next to my head, trapping me. But it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like an anchor. His other hand came up, his thumb tracing the faint yellow shadow on my cheekbone, where the bruise had been. "He will never touch you again," he vowed, and then he kissed me. It was not gentle, it was not hesitant, it was a kiss of profound, desperate hunger, a claiming. It was rough, his stubble scratching my skin, his mouth firm, demanding. It was the opposite of the almost kiss. This was a confirmation. I gasped, and he took the sound, deepening the kiss. My hands, smudged with charcoal, came up to his chest. I felt his heart hammering, a frantic rhythm that matched my own. He tasted of coffee and a darkness I couldn't name. It was a kiss full of unsaid fears, of his dead sister and my missing brother. It was a promise of violence and a plea for tenderness, all at once. He pulled back, his forehead resting against mine. We were both breathing hard. "Eva," he whispered, like it was a prayer or a curse. I looked into his dark eyes. I saw the control he exerted on the world, and I saw the loneliness behind it. This time, I didn't pull away. I rose on my toes and kissed him back. This kiss was different. It was my choice. It was slow. It was a question. He answered by lifting me from the chair, his arms sliding under my legs. I wrapped my arms around his neck, my face buried in his shoulder. He carried me into the bedroom. The room was dark, only the sliver of city light from the window. He set me on the bed. He didn't rush. He sat beside me, watching me. My fingers trembled as I reached for the buttons of his shirt. He stopped me, his hand closing over mine. "Are you sure?" he asked. His voice was raw. I didn't trust my voice. I just nodded. His patience was a revelation. Every movement was slow, deliberate. He undressed me with a reverence that made me want to cry. He kissed my shoulders, my collarbone, the palms of my hands. He was waiting for me to flinch, to show any sign of fear. When I was bare, I instinctively tried to cover myself. The shame was a phantom limb. He gently pulled my hands away, his gaze tracing my body, not with hunger, but with appreciation, like he was looking at a piece of art. He kissed the faint, yellowed mark on my cheek. He kissed the old, faded scar on my knee. He was mapping my body, learning me, healing me with his touch. When he finally came down over me, his weight was a comfort, not a burden. He held himself up on his arms, looking down at me, his face a mask of intense concentration. "You are safe," he whispered, right before he kissed me. It was tender. It was deeply emotional. It was a slow, agonizing build of trust. My hesitance was met by his patience. His control was absolute, but it wasn't for him, it was for me. He was giving me all the power, letting me set the pace until I was clinging to him, my body finally unclenching from months of fear, arching to meet his. It was not the frantic coupling of a romance novel. It was a mutual, aching need to feel real. It was two broken people finding a moment of solace in the eye of the storm. Later, I lay tangled in the sheets, my head on his chest, his arm a heavy, warm bar across my waist. I listened to his heartbeat, strong and steady. It was the first time I had slept, truly slept, since the night I saw Aiden's picture in the library. I was in a safe house, a prisoner of a different kind. My brother was missing, and a monster was hunting me. But as I drifted off, held by a man who spoke in commands and shared his grief in shadows, I felt, for the first time in a year, completely and utterly safe. I woke to the unfamiliar gray light of a queen's morning. For a single, disoriented second, I didn't know where I was. Then I felt the heat. Lorenzo was asleep beside me, his back to me. His body was a wall of solid warmth, and his arm was draped protectively over my waist. Even in sleep, I lay perfectly still, watching the slow, even rise and fall of his shoulders. The man who radiated such absolute cold control was, in this moment, completely at rest. A strange, quiet radiance filled my chest. It was a feeling I hadn't recognized in years. It was the absence of fear. Waking up in Brandon's penthouse, even in the rare moments he was gone, had been like waking up in a beautiful, soundproof coffin. I was always listening, always waiting for the sound of his key in the door. Here, with the distant sound of traffic and the weight of this dangerous man's arm across my body, I felt a profound, bone-deep sense of safety. I was not a possession. I was protected. I watched him for a long time, tracing the hard lines of his back with my eyes. Last night had been a revelation, not a whirlwind of passion, but a slow, methodical rebuilding of trust. He had treated my body not as a prize, but as a territory he was respectfully visiting, waiting for permission to explore. He had been patient, tender, and in his control. I had found my own release. Slowly, as if sensing my gaze, he tensed. The rhythm of his breathing changed. He rolled over, his eyes opening instantly, dark and alert. The predator was back. He looked at me. His gaze was heavy, searching. The warmth of the night was gone, replaced by the uncertainty of the morning. What were we now? I gave him a small, hesitant smile. He didn't smile back. He sat up, the sheet pooling around his waist, and ran a hand through his thick, dark hair. The strategist, the boss, was already calculating, the walls sliding back into place. "You should get dressed," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "Nico will bring breakfast." He swung his legs out of bed, his back a canvas of taut muscle. He was protective, yes, but the emotional vulnerability of the night was gone, locked away. He was already distant. He pulled on his pants and a t-shirt, becoming the fortress again. I felt a small pang of loss, but I also understood. This was how he survived. It was how he kept me surviving. The dining table in the safe house was not for eating. It was a war room. By the time I emerged from the shower, dressed in the simple jeans and sweater Nico had provided, Lorenzo was at the table with 2 laptops, several phones, and a stack of printed reports. Nico arrived with coffee and bagels, his face impassive as ever. He nodded to me, his gaze lingering for a second on my face. My cheek was healed, but he wasn't looking at the bruise. He was looking at the woman who had spent the night with his boss. I felt a flush rise, but I met his gaze steadily. "Callister's network is vast," Lorenzo said to Nico, as if I wasn't there. "But it's hollow. He's built on favors from politicians and fear from his partners. We can't just hit him. A war with a man that, legitimate, would bring federal heat on us. And it would put her," he nodded toward me, "in the crosshairs of the entire city press. And the boy," Nico added quietly. "We still have no eyes on the brother. My stomach clenched. Aiden. So we dismantle him, Lorenzo continued. From the inside, we bleed him dry, legally and financially. When he has nothing left, no one to call, then we find the boy and we end it. He looked at me, his dark eyes intense. You were with him for 8 months. He launders money through your art. What did you see? This was not the man who had held me last night. This was the boss, and he was asking for intel. I pushed aside the memory of his gentle touch and focused. He was arrogant, I said, my voice quiet but gaining strength. He would take calls in front of me, like I was furniture. He mentioned shipments, art shipments. We know that, Lorenzo said, his tone clipped. That's the laundering. No, I insisted, walking to the table. Not just my art, he was shipping other things with my art. He called them companions. He was on a call once with a man, a Belgian accent. He was angry. He said, the companion piece for the Monroe watercolor was damaged. That's a $2 million loss. Lorenzo and Nico looked at each other. A watercolor doesn't cost $2 million, Nico said. Exactly, I said, my heart starting to pound. I wasn't just a victim. I had information. And he kept a private ledger, not on a computer, a thin leather book. He kept it in the floor safe. Behind the fireplace, he'd make entries, and he'd always be looking at a shipping manifest from a company called Viridian Logistics. Lorenzo's eyes lit up, a cold, predatory fire. He looked at Nico. Viridian Logistics. Find out who owns it, what it ships, and what ports it uses. Now. Nico nodded and disappeared into the other room. Lorenzo turned back to me. The hard, boss-like expression softened, just a fraction. Good, he said. It was a simple word, but it felt like an embrace. You did good. We fell into a strange, new domesticity. The safe house was our island. Lorenzo worked, and I drew, but now I also helped. I sat with him, sifting through the reports his men compiled. I identified names of politicians Brandon had boasted about, recognized coded account numbers from statements I'd glimpsed. We were a team. We ate our meals at the war table, surrounded by the architecture of Brandon's destruction. We shared quiet moments, the silence comfortable, no longer strained. One evening, I was sketching his hand as it rested on a report, marveling at the contrast of its strength and the stillness. You're always watching, he murmured, not looking up from his screen. I'm an artist, I said, my charcoal moving. It's what I do. I see things. You do, he agreed. He finally looked up, the blue light of the laptop illuminating the hard planes of his face. You see the world as it is, not as you want it to be. It's a strength. Is that what you do? He leaned back, his chair creaking. I see the world for what it is, a place of predators and prey. My family, we were prey for a long time. He was opening up, just a sliver, and I held my breath. Maria, he said, his voice flat. My sister, I told you about her. What I didn't tell you was that I had a chance to get her out. Before I was arrested, I could have taken her. We could have run, but I was 17. I wanted to fight. I wanted to prove I was a man. My pride got her killed. He stared at the wall, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with a regret so profound it was a physical presence in the room. This, he said, gesturing to the laptops, the reports, his entire life. This control. This is my penance. I will never let what I love be vulnerable again. I will never be powerless again. Lorenzo, I whispered. Putting my sketchbook down, I went to him, kneeling by his chair. You are not powerless. Look at what you are doing. You are saving me. You are saving Aiden. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable, and he put his hand on my head, his fingers threading into my hair. It wasn't a lover's caress. It was a benediction, a burden. I am, he said, more to himself than to me. I will. In that moment, I saw a future. It was blurry, and it was dangerous, but it was mine. When this is over, I said, my voice firm, I want to do something. I want to help women like me. The ones who can't signal a man in a restaurant, the ones who don't have a mafia boss to save them. A strange expression crossed his face. It was inspiration, mixed with a deep, sudden fear. "Eva," he said, his voice rough, "you have a softness, a light. This world, my world, it will crush that." "No," I said, putting my hand over his. "It won't. You didn't save me just so I could hide." He stared at me, and I saw a new respect in his eyes. He was inspired, and he was terrified for me. The bubble burst 3 days later. I was getting cabin fever. I hadn't breathed fresh air in weeks. I felt the walls closing in. "I need to get out," I told Nico. Lorenzo was in a meeting in another room. "Just for 5 minutes, just to the roof. Something." Nico looked pained. The boss has me on lockdown. I'm not a prisoner, Nico. I'm a partner. I just need air." He relented. It was a stupid, fatal mistake. He took me to the underground garage. "We'll take a drive. Tinted windows. We won't stop. Just a drive around the block. That's all I can give you." It was glorious. Seeing the sky, the people, the normal life. It was a 20-minute loop, and it was enough. We were pulling back into the garage when Nico slowed. A dark, black Escalade. Brandon's signature vehicle was parked across the street from the garage entrance. Nico swore, a sharp, violent word. He hit the button to close the garage door and slammed the car into park. "Who's in it?" I whispered, my blood turning to ice. "I don't know, but they saw us. They saw the car." We ran. We took the freight elevator, and the moment the doors opened, Lorenzo was there, his face a mask of cold fury. "What did you do?" he bit out, his eyes on Nico. "Escalade. Across the street, they saw the car," Nico reported, his voice tight. Lorenzo didn't yell. He didn't rage. He became terrifyingly calm. "The safe house is compromised. Pack, now." He grabbed me by the arm, his grip hard, pulling me toward the bedroom. "A bag. One. Clothes. Nothing else. We have 5 minutes, maybe less." I threw my sketchbook, my charcoal, and a few items of clothing into a backpack. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip it. I heard a loud clang from the hallway, the sound of the freight elevator being forced. "Stairs," Lorenzo commanded. Nico was at the apartment door, his gun drawn. Lorenzo pulled his own weapon from a holster I'd never seen him wear. The sight of it made me sick. "Go," Nico said. "I'll hold them." "No," Lorenzo said. "You're with us. Back door. Go." We ran down a service corridor, bursting into a dark, concrete stairwell. We clattered down 10 flights, the smell of dust and concrete filling my lungs. We emerged in a different part of the garage, on the lowest level. A bullet pinged off the concrete wall above my head, a sharp, whining sound. They were already in the garage. Lorenzo shoved me behind him. "Stay low! Move!" We ran toward a black armored Mercedes sedan in a private slot. Lorenzo remotely unlocked it. "Get in," he yelled. I dove into the passenger seat. Nico jumped in the back. Lorenzo was in the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life with a throaty growl. The Escalade screeched around the corner, blocking the exit ramp, its headlights blinding us. 2 men in suits jumped out, their guns raised. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He slammed the car into reverse, spun the wheel, and drove straight at a chain-link fence at the other end of the garage. "Hold on," he roared. We crashed through the fence with a sound of tortured metal, landing hard on an alleyway 1 level up. The men from the Escalade were running, firing at us. Thud, thud, thud! The bullets hit the car, sounding like heavy stones. "They're firing," I screamed, ducking. "This car is armored," Lorenzo said, his voice calm, his eyes fixed on the road as he sped through the alley. A different sound, a high-pitched crack, followed by the sound of a spiderweb breaking. The passenger window, my window. It wasn't fully bulletproof. Glass shattered, exploding inward in a spray of sharp crystals. "Eva!" Lorenzo's reaction was inhumanly fast. He threw himself across the console, his body a solid, living shield, covering me as the glass rained down. He pushed my head down, his arm like a steel bar across my back, his own head exposed. "Lorenzo, no!" I screamed, muffled by his shoulder. He grunted, a sharp intake of breath. He pulled back, slamming the car into a hard left turn, sending us fishtailing onto the street. "Nico, are we clear?" "Clear for now," Nico said from the back. Lorenzo drove, his focus absolute, his jaw set. He was driving with one hand, his other arm, his right, was hanging at his side. His sleeve was dark, too dark. "Lorenzo," I whispered, my voice shaking, "you're bleeding." "It's nothing," he gritted out, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It's not nothing, you're bleeding." "It's a graze," he snapped. "The glass. I'm fine." We drove for over an hour, leaving the city, the suburbs, the whole world behind. We drove until the buildings melted into trees and the highways turned into country roads. We finally pulled onto a long gravel driveway, hidden by a thicket of pine trees. At the end was a simple, beautiful farmhouse, all dark wood and stone, a plume of smoke rising from its chimney. A man was on the porch, waiting. He was older, with a kind face and the weathered hands of a farmer. "Lorenzo," the man said, his voice warm, "you look like hell." "Marco," Lorenzo said, climbing out of the car. He was pale. "It's been a while. We need a place, just for a night or two." "You're always welcome, Fratello," Marco said, clapping him on the shoulder, and then his eyes widened. "You're bleeding." Lorenzo swayed, and I was at his side instantly. "He was shot," I said, my voice high. "It was a graze, and the glass—" I helped him inside, his arm draped over my shoulder. Marco and Nico followed, their faces grim. The house was warm, smelling of wood smoke and coffee. "Get him on the sofa," Marco ordered. "I'll get the kit. My wife was a nurse." He bustled off. Lorenzo sank onto the couch, his face slick with a cold sweat. "I told you," he hissed. "It's nothing." "Shut up, Lorenzo," I said, my voice trembling. I gently, carefully, started to roll up his sleeve. The fabric was stuck to the wound. It was a long, ugly gash along his forearm, bleeding sluggishly. It was deep. I could see flecks of glass. "This isn't nothing," I said, my stomach turning. Marco returned with a heavy-duty first aid kit. "I can do it, Signorina." "No," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "I'll do it. Get me hot water, soap, and a clean towel." Lorenzo looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his pain-filled eyes. This was a reversal of our first night. Now I was the one in control. My hands, which had trembled when I tried to paint, were perfectly steady. I cleaned the wound, my touch gentle but firm, picking out the tiny shards of glass. He winced, his breath hissing through his teeth, but he didn't pull away. He watched my face, his gaze intense. The act was profoundly intimate, more intimate than our nights together. I was tending to his vulnerability, seeing the man beneath the armor. My fingers brushed his skin, and I felt the heat of him, the coiled strength even in his stillness. "You're gonna need stitches," I murmured, my face close to his arm. "Just wrap it," he said. "It will get infected. You need stitches. Hold still." Marco had provided a sterile suture kit. I threaded the needle. My movements practiced. I had done this before, on my own canvases, stitching mixed media elements together. This was just a different kind of canvas. I made the first stitch, and his whole body went rigid. "Breathe, Lorenzo," I whispered, not looking at his face. "Just look at me." He looked at me. His dark eyes were bottomless. I made the second stitch. He didn't flinch. We were locked in this bubble. The smell of antiseptic and his blood, the quiet crackle of the fire. I finished, my work neat and tight. I bandaged his arm. My hands lingered on his skin. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough. "You saved my life," I whispered back. "You shielded me." "I told you I would," he said. That night, sleep was impossible. The adrenaline of the chase, the intimacy of caring for him. It all left me raw, exposed. I was in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, when my door creaked open. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the hall light. His arm was in a sling Marco had made, but he stood tall. He didn't speak. He just came in, closing the door behind him. He sat on the bed, the mattress dipped. "I couldn't," he said, his voice low. "I couldn't stay in the other room. I needed to see you were safe." "I'm safe," I said. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." He reached out with his good hand, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, when that glass shattered, when I thought. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. In that second, he hadn't been the boss. He had been a man terrified of losing something. I leaned into his touch. "I'm here." He leaned in, and this kiss was nothing like the others. It wasn't the tentative exploration of our first night or the hungry claiming of the second. This was desperate. It was raw. It was the kiss of two people who had seen the void and clawed their way back. It was honest. His mouth was frantic on mine, and I clung to him, my hands in his hair, careful of his arm. We were still dressed. This wasn't about sex. It was about life. It was about pressing our bodies together to prove we were still solid, still breathing. He pushed me back onto the pillows, his body covering mine, his good arm braced by my head, his injured one resting between us. He buried his face in my neck, his breathing ragged. "Ava," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion he would never name. I held him, my hands running over his strong back, feeling the tension, the tightly coiled power that had been, for a moment, shattered by a bullet. "It's okay," I whispered. "I've got you." He lifted his head, his eyes boring into mine, dark and fierce in the moonlight. He was a man of words, of commands, of iron control. But in that moment, his body said everything he couldn't. He kissed me again, slower this time, but with a new intensity. It was a promise, a vow. It was a claiming, not of my body, but of my survival. He was tethering himself to me. He lay with me all night, holding me. We didn't sleep. We just held on. Just before dawn, I watched the gray light touch his face. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. The man who had been desperate and vulnerable in the night was gone. In his place was the boss, but his expression had changed. It was no longer just protective or even angry. It was cold. It was absolute. I saw the vow settle into him, a lethal calm. He had tried to dismantle Brandon. He had tried to protect me. Now, he would do what he had to. I knew, as I lay in his arms, that he was no longer just planning to save me. He was planning to hunt, and he would not stop until Brandon Callister was erased. The silence of the farmhouse was louder than the city had ever been. Lorenzo was gone, and he had left 2 mornings after the shootout, his arm bound in a crisp. White bandage beneath his suit, the stitches I had given him pulling tight. He had returned to the city, to his war. He left me with Marco, his childhood friend and Marco's wife, Sophia. They were kind, quiet people who moved around me with gentle deference, offering food I couldn't eat and tea I couldn't taste. They were trying to give me sanctuary. But the farmhouse, with its exposed beams and crackling fireplace, felt like a cage, a different kind of cage. I was safe, but I was alone, and Lorenzo was dark. He had left me a new burner phone. For emergencies only. "Eva, do not call my other numbers. Do not call Nico. They will be watching everything. Wait for my call." He had been gone for 10 days. 10 days of agonizing, echoing silence. Every hour, my mind replayed the sound of the glass shattering, the thud of the bullets against the armored car, the feeling of his body shielding mine, and every hour, I was consumed by a suffocating, paralyzing guilt. I had brought this down on them, on Nico, on this kind couple, Marco and Sophia, who were harboring a fugitive. I had put Lorenzo in the path of a bullet, and Aiden. God, Aiden. Every second I was safe was a second he was not. I tried to call Lorenzo's old number, the one he'd used at the safe house. It went straight to a dead, digital tone. I tried Nico's, the same. He had cut the links. Not just to protect himself, but to protect me from him. He had made himself a ghost to keep me from being tracked. The logic was sound. The emotional reality was brutal. It felt like abandonment. I spent my days pacing the wide wooden porch, my eyes scanning the tree line, expecting an escalade at any moment. I spent my nights in the guest bed, tangled in the handmade quilt, my body aching for the solid, grounding presence of the man who had held me through the dawn. I tried to draw. My hands, which had been so steady when I stitched his arm, now trembled with fear. My charcoal sketches were frantic, angry. I drew the splintered glass. I drew the dark, hollow muzzle of a gun. I drew Aiden's face from memory, his eyes wide with a confusion I couldn't bear. On the 12th day, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sun set, convinced I would never see him again, convinced that Brandon had won, that Lorenzo was in a ditch somewhere, and that my brother was gone forever. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. My heart stopped. I fumbled it from my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The screen read, "Unknown." I answered, "Hello?" "Eva." The sound of his voice. It wasn't a call. It was a resurrection. I choked on a sob, my knees buckling. I sank onto the top step of the porch. "Lorenzo," I whispered the name a prayer. "I have him." I couldn't process the words. "What? Who?" "Aiden." His voice was rough, exhausted, but it was him. "I have him. He's safe. He's with me." The world tilted. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for months suddenly lifted, and I couldn't breathe. I was lightheaded, dizzy with a relief so profound it was painful. "Is he—" "He's scared," Lorenzo said, anticipating the question. "He's confused, but he is unharmed. Eva, I promise you, Brandon never laid a hand on him. He was being held in a private facility, a research group for gifted students, guarded but not harmed." I couldn't form the words. I heard him hesitate. "It's not secure, but—" "1 second." There was a muffled sound, the sound of a hand over the phone, and a distant, "Just 1 minute? Say hello." Then, a frantic, reedy voice. Eva, is that you?" "Oh my God, where are you? What's going on? This guy, Lorenzo, he pulled me out of this building. There were alarms." "Eva, I'm scared." "Aiden," I sobbed, clutching the phone. "Aiden, listen to me. You're safe. I'm safe. That man, Lorenzo, you trust him. Do you hear me? You do everything he says. He's saving us. I'll explain everything soon. I promise. I love you." "Eva, wait." The phone was pulled away. Lorenzo's voice was back, firm and commanding. "That's enough. He's secure. Eva, he's with my men. He will not be touched." You found him." I wept. "You rescued him." "I went myself," he said, and I heard the unspoken words. "I didn't fail you like I failed Maria. I didn't send my men. I went myself." He had kept his word. He had rescued my brother personally, the last, deepest layer of my fear, the fear that he was just another user, crumbled to dust. My trust in him was no longer a hope. It was absolute. "Brandon is getting sloppy," Lorenzo said, his voice turning cold. "He's hemorrhaging money. The political favors are drying up. I confronted 2 of his city council contacts. I acquired evidence. They're no longer taking his calls." "He's cornered," I whispered, a new, cold fear replacing the relief. "A cornered animal." "Yes," Lorenzo said, "which is why you are not safe there anymore. That farmhouse was a stopgap. He knows you were with me in Queens. He'll be looking for my oldest friends. He'll find Marco. You have to be ready to move." "When?" "Soon. I'm sending a transport. It will be there." A sound from the edge of the property cut him off, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet dusk. It was the crack of a heavy branch, followed by a sharp, guttural yelp. Marco's dog. The dog didn't bark again. "Lorenzo," I whispered into the phone, my blood turning to ice. "Someone's here." "What?" "The dog. It stopped barking. I see something at the tree line." It was an Escalade, not on the driveway. It was pushing through the young pine trees, its black paint glinting in the twilight. "They're here," I gasped. Lorenzo, they're here. Get out of the house, Ava. Not the front. Go out the back. To the woods. Run. Do not stop. Do you hear me? His voice was a roar of command. Marco and Sophia? I'll call Marco's landline. I'll warn him. You, run. Now. I dropped the phone and scrambled back into the house. Marco was coming from the kitchen, a shotgun in his hand. Sophia was behind him, her face white. They're here, I screamed. Go, Marco yelled, shoving me toward the back door. Through the woods, to the river. Follow the water. Go, we'll hold them. No, Go, he bellowed, a farmer defending his land with the fury of a lion. I ran. I burst out the back door, my feet clad only in thin house slippers, hitting the cold, damp earth. I plunged into the woods just as I heard the first shouts from the front of the house. I ran from the penthouse, barefoot on the concrete. Now I was running barefoot in the mud, my slippers sucked off by the thick mire. The woods were dark, a maze of sharp branches and unseen roots. A branch whipped across my face, stinging like a slap. I tasted blood. I didn't care. I kept running. I could hear them behind me. They were fanned out, crashing through the underbrush. Callister wants her alive. Don't damage the asset, one of them yelled. The words chilled me more than a gunshot would have. Asset. That's all I was. That's all I had ever been to him. My lungs were on fire. My feet were cut and bleeding, sharp stones slicing into my soles. But I thought of Aiden. Safe. I thought of Lorenzo. His voice on the phone. I would not be taken. I burst into a clearing. It was a dead end, a sheer 20-foot drop to the rocky riverbed below. I was trapped. I spun around, my back to the drop, my chest heaving. 3 men emerged from the trees. They were dressed in black. Tactical gear, not suits. This was Brandon's private army. Nowhere to go. Miss Monroe, the lead man said, his voice calm. He wasn't even breathing hard. Mr. Callister is very eager to see you. Stay away from me, I panted, holding my hands up. Don't be difficult. He just wants to talk. He lunged. I screamed and dodged, but his hand caught my arm, his fingers digging in like talons. He yanked me forward, spinning me around and clamping his other hand over my mouth. Got her! He yelled. I kicked and bit, but he was a mountain. He was dragging me back toward the house. And then I heard it. A sound that started as a low, distant pulse. Thwop, thwop, thwop. It grew, louder and louder, a violent, rhythmic beating that seemed to shake the trees. The men stopped. They looked up, their faces tight with confusion. What is that? Is that police? No, the lead man said, his grip tightening on me. It burst over the tree line, a sleek, black helicopter, matte and menacing, with no markings. It was a machine of war. It angled down, its landing lights snapping on, flooding the clearing with a blinding, artificial daylight. The downdraft was a hurricane, ripping leaves from the trees, forcing us to shield our faces. The helicopter didn't land. It hovered, 10 feet off the ground, the side door sliding open. And he was there. Lorenzo. He was crouched in the opening, his good arm braced. His other arm, the one I had stitched, still in its sling. He was wearing a black suit, his hair whipped by the wind, and he looked like the angel of death. Let her go! His voice boomed over the noise, amplified by a speaker. The man holding me laughed, a strained, terrified sound. He pulled me tighter, pressing a gun to my temple. You back off, he screamed, or I'll... He didn't finish. A single, sharp thwack echoed from the helicopter. The man holding me went rigid, his grip loosened. He looked down, a dark spot appearing on his chest. He wasn't dead, but he was neutralized. He crumpled to the ground. Nico was in the seat behind Lorenzo, a long-range rifle braced, his expression impassive. Eva, now! Lorenzo roared, his arm outstretched. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking. The other 2 men were raising their weapons, but the downdraft and the blinding light made it impossible to aim. I ran. I lunged for Lorenzo's hand. His grip was iron. He grabbed my forearm and hauled me into the helicopter in one fluid motion, pulling me into his chest, covering my body with his own as Nico laid down, suppressing fire. The helicopter tilted, banked hard, and rose, soaring up and over the trees. I was safe. I collapsed against him, my body finally succumbing to the terror and the relief. I buried my face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, soap, wool, and cold power. I began to sob, my body shaking uncontrollably. I thought, I couldn't speak. He held me, his good arm crushing me to him. Shh, he whispered, his lips against my hair. I told you I would come. He held me away, his hands on my shoulders. His eyes were frantic, scanning my face, my body, checking for injuries. He saw the blood on my face from the branch, the mud caking my legs, the cuts on my bare feet. His expression turned to a cold, lethal fury. I thought I lost you, I sobbed, clinging to his suit. I thought they had you. Never, he said, his voice a raw growl. He pulled me back, holding me as if he could absorb me into himself. Never. We landed on the roof of a skyscraper that made Brandon's penthouse look like a guest cottage. This was Lorenzo's home, his fortress. The moment we were inside, I saw him. Aiden! He ran to me, his face pale. Ava, you're bleeding. What's happening? I hugged him, holding my brother so tight I thought he might break. It's okay. We're safe now. It's finally over. Lorenzo gave us a moment. Then he put his hand on my shoulder. Aiden is secure. My men will watch him. You and we need to talk. He led me to a study. He poured me a brandy, his good hand steady, and cleaned the cuts on my feet himself, his touch gentle, his face a mask of stone. He's finished, Lorenzo said, not looking up as he taped a bandage to my heel. The rescue at the farmhouse, that was his last move. He's desperate. I have the evidence. The blackmail on the district attorney worked. We have his offshore accounts, the Viridian logistics link to the human trafficking. The feds are hungry. So what now? I whispered. Now, I finish it, and you and Aiden get on a plane. I have a place in Argentina. You'll be safe there. You'll have a new life. I looked at him, at this man who had crossed every line, who had taken bullets for me, who had rescued my brother. He was offering me an escape, the very thing I had craved for a year. No, I said. He looked up. His dark eyes narrowed. What? No, I'm not running. Not anymore. You saved my life, Lorenzo, but I have to take it back. He took everything from me. My art, my freedom, my brother. I'm not going to hide in Argentina while you clean up my mess. Eva, this is not a game. It's dangerous. I want to testify, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised me. I want to be there. I want to face him. I want him to see me be the one to put him in a cage. Lorenzo stared at me. The fear for me was back, but it was mixed with something else. A fierce, burning pride. He saw the woman he'd saved, but he also saw the woman I had become. He nodded. A slow, grave acceptance. Then we do it your way, but we do it my way too. The plan was audacious. It was pure Lorenzo. He's a narcissist, Lorenzo explained, pacing his study. He's lost his political cover, his accounts are frozen, but he still has his art. He can't resist a chance to show off and liquidate his last assets. So we're throwing him a party. It was a fake art auction, a private black market sale of a new, hot European artist. Set for the following night, it was designed to be irresistible to a man like Brandon, a last-ditch effort to move his money. The auction house is neutral territory, or so he thinks. Lorenzo said, but the staff will be my people, and the buyers will be federal agents. And me, I asked. You, he said, will be the surprise guest. The evening before the takedown, the penthouse was quiet. Aiden was in a guest wing, safe, guarded, and finally, asleep. The city glittered below us, a carpet of diamonds. It was no longer Brandon's city. It felt like our city. I was on the terrace, breathing the cold, clean air. When Lorenzo came out, he'd traded his suit for a soft, black cashmere sweater. His arm was still in the sling. a stark white against the dark wool. He handed me a glass of wine. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "I'm terrified," I said honestly, "but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." I turned to him, the glass cold in my hands. I never thanked you for Aiden. What you risked. I can never repay you." "There is no debt," he said, his voice low. "I did it for me, too. I told you. I will not be too late again. But you were in time. You saved us." I stepped closer, placing my hand on his chest. I could feel his heart, a steady, solid beat beneath my palm. "Lorenzo, I don't feel like a victim anymore." His eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to my mouth. The air between us crackled, charged with everything we had survived, the shattered glass, the shared fear, the stitches, the helicopter. He set his glass down. He reached out with his good hand, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, his touch feather-light. "You were never a victim, Eva," he whispered, his voice thick. "You were a survivor, waiting for a weapon." He leaned in and kissed me. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss from the helicopter. It was soft. It was raw. It was a kiss of profound, breathtaking tenderness. It was all the words he couldn't say. He lifted his head, his forehead resting against mine. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured. It wasn't an order. It was a plea. He led me inside, away from the cold. His bedroom was vast, the bed facing a wall of glass that overlooked the entire city. He hadn't turned on the lights. The room was lit only by the moon and the 1,000 distant lights of New York. This time there was no shame. There was no hesitation. He undressed me slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. His gaze was a physical touch, and I didn't flinch. I didn't hide. I stood before him, the cuts on my feet a testament to my escape, the faint scar from the branch on my cheek a battle wound. He undressed, his movements economical with his one good arm. He laid me on the bed, the silk sheets cool against my back. He moved over me, bracing himself on his good elbow, his bandaged arm a stark white between us. He didn't just kiss me, he mapped me. He kissed the scar on my cheek. He kissed my collarbone. He kissed the palms of my hands. It was a rediscovery, a worship. My skin, which had flinched from the world for so long, now craved his. My hands went to his hair, to the hard muscles of his back, pulling him closer. It was a slow, deliberate union, a synchronization of two damaged souls. It was not a desperate act, but a conscious choice, a quiet, profound promise in the dark that we would survive this, that we would see the dawn. We moved together, a silent language of healing and strength, a final sealing of our bond before the war. Much later, we lay tangled, the city lights our only witness. He was quiet, his breathing deep. He pulled me against his chest, his good arm holding me tight. He kissed my forehead, a long, lingering press of his lips. "I promise you, Eva," he whispered into my hair, "no matter what happens in that room tomorrow, you will be safe." He held me until I drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. When I woke, hours later, the bed beside me was empty. The sun was just beginning to touch the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fragile hope. Lorenzo was gone. He had left to prepare for the operation. He was the boss again. He was going to war. I got up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city, at the auction house many blocks away. I was terrified. But I was not a victim. I was his, and I was ready. The auction hall was a cathedral of glass and steel, a place designed to launder money under the guise of culture. It was all pale wood, soaring ceilings, and spotlights that made the artwork, most of it worthless. Fashionable garbage, looked like masterpieces. Tonight, it was a trap, beautifully set. I stood in the wings, just off the main stage, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, under my black silk evening dress. I was wearing a lightweight Kevlar vest. Lorenzo had insisted when I'd argued, he'd simply put his good hand on my cheek and said, "I will not be negotiating your safety. Not tonight." His promise from the night before, that I would be safe, was not just an emotional comfort, it was a tactical guarantee. My hands were not shaking. The terror I had lived with for a year was gone, replaced by a crystalline, cold purpose. I was no longer the girl in the restaurant, signaling for help. I was the woman who had stitched her savior's arm. I was the woman who had been pulled from the woods. I was, as Lorenzo had said, a survivor waiting for her weapon. Tonight, my weapon was the truth. I watched the buyers file in. They were a mix of Lorenzo's men, looking bored and wealthy, and federal agents, looking sharp and alert under their tailored suits. They mingled, sipping champagne, their eyes scanning the room. Lorenzo's people, dressed as waiters and security, moved among them, silent and watchful. I searched for him. I found him on a small, private balcony overlooking the floor. He was in shadow, a dark silhouette against the glass, his injured arm in a black silk sling that blended with his suit. He was a king surveying his battlefield. He was not looking at the art. He was watching the entrance. Then Brandon arrived. He swept in with the same smug, proprietary air he carried into every room. He was flanked by 2 new bodyguards, not the men from the farmhouse. They were likely captured or dead. He looked untouched. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly coiffed. He believed, with the bottomless arrogance of a true narcissist, that he had escaped. He believed he was here to liquidate his last assets and disappear, richer than ever. He smiled at the auctioneer, a man I knew was one of Lorenzo's top lieutenants. He took a glass of champagne from a waiter who was, in fact, an armed FBI agent. Brandon Callister was the only person in the room who did not know he was already a dead man. He saw the art on the walls and nodded, pleased. He saw the wealthy buyers and his gaze turned sharp, calculating his profits. He never once looked at me. He had no idea I was even in the state, let alone 10 yards away. The auctioneer began. He sold 2 paintings, meaningless abstracts, for laughably high prices to 2 agents in the front row. The trap was being set. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer said, his voice smooth, we have a last-minute, very special addition to our catalog, a rare piece, brought to us by a source very close to one of our most esteemed collectors. We present The Survivor. That was my cue. A single spotlight hit the small podium at the side of the stage. I stepped into it. I heard the collective intake of breath from the crowd. I heard a glass shatter on the floor. I looked directly at Brandon. He had been smiling. Mid-conversation, the smile froze, then melted, replaced by a look of utter, profound disbelief. His face went white. He understood, in that one devastating second, that he had not just been outmaneuvered, he had been annihilated. "Ava," he whispered, the name a curse. I gripped the sides of the podium, my knuckles white. My voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was a clear, cold bell that rang through the silent hall. "My name is Eva Monroe," I began, my eyes locked on his. "For the last year, many of you knew me as an artist, a commodity, an asset, owned and curated by that man, Brandon Callister." "What is this?" Brandon snarled, now taking a step forward. "Was security?" 2 of Lorenzo's men moved to flank him, their hands on his arms. "Please remain quiet, sir." "He presented me as a success story," I continued, my voice gaining strength, projecting over his struggles. In reality, I was a prisoner, a woman he controlled by threatening the life of her younger brother. The crowd murmured. The feds looked on, impassive, their performance perfect. "But this is not just my story. It is the story of his other victims, mister. Callister did not just buy my art, he used it. He used it to launder millions of dollars in illicit funds, moving money for criminals across the globe. But art," I said, my voice dripping with contempt, "was not his only cargo." I saw Lorenzo lean forward on the balcony, his focus absolute. "I'm here to give evidence that Brandon Callister, through his shell company, Viridian Logistics, is a key partner in an international human trafficking ring. He shipped human beings in the same containers as priceless art. He called them companion pieces. "You lying!" Brandon roared, his face purple with rage. He was lunging now, fighting against the men holding him. "Now!" a voice shouted from the front row. The trap snapped shut. The buyers and waiters moved as one. Jackets were thrown open. Guns and badges appeared. "FBI, nobody move, hands in the air." The hall exploded into chaos. Agents swarmed Brandon, slamming him against a pillar. His smug face pressed into the marble. His 2 guards were on the ground, zip-tied, before they could even reach for their weapons. It was over. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a year. I sagged against the podium, my legs weak with a relief so total it was debilitating. I looked up at the balcony. Lorenzo was gone from the shadows. It was done. We were free. A sound, sharp and out of place, cracked through the air. It was not the authoritative yell of an agent. It was the distinct, terrifying crack of a gunshot. It came from the main entrance. One of Brandon's associates, a man I hadn't even recognized, had been lingering by the door and had slipped out during the initial confusion. He was back, his face a mask of panic, firing blindly into the crowd, trying to create an escape for his boss. Time slowed. I saw the muzzle flash. I saw the agents at the front duck and turn. I saw the man pivot, his wild eyes finding me, the source of the betrayal, alone and exposed on the stage. I had time to think. Kevlar. I'm wearing Kevlar. I didn't have time to move. He raised his gun, aiming directly at me. A black-suited shape slammed into me from the side. It was Lorenzo. He had not been on the balcony. He had been on the floor, anticipating this exact possibility, watching the exits. Not the target. He hit me like a linebacker, his arms wrapping around me, his body shielding mine. The force of the tackle sent us crashing off the low stage, skidding hard onto the polished marble floor. I landed beneath him, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. His weight was a dead, crushing pressure. Another shot, then 2 more, in rapid succession, the agents, neutralizing the threat. Then silence, save for the shouting. "Lorenzo," I gasped, trying to breathe under his weight. "Lorenzo, it's okay. They got him. You can get up." He didn't move. He grunted, a low, pained sound that I recognized from the farmhouse. A sick, cold dread washed over me. "Lorenzo?" I pushed at his shoulder. His body rolled, limp, off of mine. His pristine white shirt, under his open suit jacket, was blossoming with a dark, wet red. It was high on his left shoulder, near his collarbone. He hadn't been wearing a vest. He could not. With his injured arm in the sling, he had shielded me, all 6'2" of him, with nothing. "No," I whispered. It wasn't a scream. It was a denial. "No, no, no." I scrambled to my knees. "Lorenzo!" This time I screamed it, a raw, ragged sound that tore from my throat. Nico was there instantly, his gun still raised, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen on his face. He was shouting into his radio. "Boss is hit. I need extraction, now. Lock down the building." I ripped open Lorenzo's shirt. Blood. There was so much blood. I pressed both my hands to the wound, trying to stop the flow, but it was pumping, hot and slick, between my fingers. "Stay with me," I sobbed, my tears blurring his face. "You stay with me, Lorenzo DeMarco. Do you hear me? You promised." His eyes flickered open. They were hazy, unfocused, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked at me, a strange, faint smile touching his lips. He was in agony, but he looked relieved. "You're free, Kara," he whispered. His voice a thread, his good hand, his right, came up, his fingers weakly brushing my cheek. "You're free. Eva, that's all." I don't care," I screamed, pressing down, my silk dress soaked in his blood. "I don't care about being free if you're not here. Don't you leave me. Don't you dare." His men were surrounding us, forming a human wall. They lifted him, a carefully orchestrated movement, onto a stretcher that had appeared from nowhere. I never let go of his hand. I ran beside them, through the service exits, into a black ambulance that was waiting in the alley. The doors slammed shut, and we sped away, our sirens screaming into the night, leaving Brandon Callister and the wreckage of our past behind. The hospital was a blur of white light, antiseptic, and beeping. I sat in the plastic chair beside his bed in the private wing. I had been there for 3 days. I was still wearing the same black dress, now stained and stiff with his dried blood. I had refused to leave. I had not slept. Nico had brought me coffee, which I didn't drink, and a tablet, which I didn't look at. "It's over, Ava," he'd said, his voice hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Callister is gone. Federal custody, no bail. He's facing everything. They're calling you a hero. The media. It's all over the news. The brave survivor." I waved my hand, dismissing it. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the slow, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor beside me. He was stable. The bullet had missed his heart and the major artery by millimeters, but he had lost a terrifying amount of blood. He'd been in surgery for 8 hours. He was alive, but he hadn't woken up. I held his hand. It was large, warm, but limp. I held it to my cheek. My own tears long since dried up, leaving my face stiff and salty. "You have to wake up," I whispered to his still face. "You saved me. Lorenzo, you won, but it doesn't count if you don't wake up and see it. I'm not free until you're free, too." I told him about the news. I told him his men had found Marco and Sophia safe. I told him Aiden was safe, asking every hour when he could see me. I just kept talking, my voice growing hoarse, willing him to come back to me. I finally dozed off, my head falling onto the mattress, my hand still clutching his. The beep, beep, beep lulling me into a fitful, exhausted sleep. A change in pressure woke me. His fingers, they had moved. I shot bolt upright, my heart hammered. His eyes were open. They weren't hazy. They weren't unfocused. They were open, and they were looking right at me. A sound, half sob, half laugh, tore out of me. "Lorenzo!" He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He just swallowed, his eyes dark and exhausted but alive, drinking me in. You're awake," I wept, the tears finally coming again, a hot, cleansing flood. "You're awake." I brought his hand to my lips, kissing his knuckles, his fingers, my tears falling onto his skin. I thought... "Shh," he rasped. His voice was a dry, painful croak. He tried to sit up, wincing. "No, don't move," I pleaded, helping him settle back. He lifted his good hand, his right, and weakly brushed the hair from my face. His thumb traced the path of a tear. I leaned down, pressing my forehead to his, our breathing mingling. "Don't you ever do that again," I whispered. He was aiming at you," he rasped, his eyes fierce, even in his weakness. "I don't care. I had a vest. I couldn't say it. I kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion or of tenderness. It was a kiss of raw, desperate survival. It tasted of salt, antiseptic, and the metallic tang of dried blood. It was a kiss that said, "You are here. I am here. We are alive." He kissed me back, a weak but stubborn pressure, a claiming. He pulled back. His breathing labored. He tried to pull me closer. I shifted carefully and lay on the bed beside him, my head on his good shoulder, mindful of the tubes and wires. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound of profound relief, and his good arm came around me, holding me tight. "You saved me too, Eva," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before. I buried my face in his neck. I understood. I had given him something to fight for, something to live for. Beyond the ghosts of his past, I had pulled him from his own darkness, just as he had pulled me from mine. We lay there, two survivors, tangled together in a hospital bed, the steady beep of the heart monitor the most beautiful sound in the world. A few days later, he was sitting up, his arm in yet another sling, looking pale but profoundly annoyed. He was already barking orders at Nico, who was taking them with a visible, profound relief. There was a light knock on the door. Aiden poked his head in, his expression a mix of awe and teenage awkwardness. He was holding a small, wilting bouquet of hospital flowers. "Hey," Aiden said. I jumped up, hugging him. "Hey, you!" Aiden looked past me, at the man in the bed, at the man who had pulled him from a black car, who had saved his sister's life. "So," Aiden said, walking forward, "you're the guy, the one with the growly voice." I held my breath. Lorenzo looked at my brother. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't the calculating strategist. He was just a man, injured and tired. He studied Aiden, seeing the family resemblance, seeing the boy he had risked his life to save. "You're the kid who likes to study," Lorenzo replied, his voice still rough. Aiden shuffled. "Yeah, thanks for, the helicopter and for not letting me get trafficked or whatever. That was weird." I let out a small laugh. "Eva said you got shot," Aiden continued, looking at the sling. "That's pretty hardcore. Does it hurt?" "Like hell," Lorenzo said. Aiden nodded, satisfied. "Cool. Well, here." He shoved the flowers onto the bedside table. I'm glad you're not dead. You make Eva... She's different. Now, she's not scared." I looked at Lorenzo. His dark, intense eyes were fixed on Aiden. He was watching this kid, this piece of my life, this bright, unbroken part of my world. And then, the impossible happened. The corner of Lorenzo's mouth twitched. It wasn't his cold smirk of satisfaction. It wasn't his pained smile of relief. It was a real, actual smile. It was small. It was faint. But it was there. It reached his eyes, warming them instantly, chasing away the last of the shadows. He was looking at Aiden, but he was seeing me. He was seeing a future. I walked to the bed and took his good hand, lacing my fingers with his. He squeezed. It was a new beginning. It was a language without words. It was the sound of the ice. Finally, and completely, breaking. 6 months, 181 days. That's how long it had been since I'd felt the sterile cold of a hospital floor under my shoes. 6 months since the sound of a heart monitor had been the only music in my world. Now, the only sounds in my world were the scrape of Aiden's fork on a plate, the distant rumble of the subway, and the bright, clear sunlight streaming through the bay window of our Brooklyn brownstone. The glass prison of Brandon's penthouse was a memory. The concrete fortress of Lorenzo's safe house was a history lesson. This was home. 3 floors of old, creaking wood, exposed brick, and rooms flooded with light. My studio took up the entire top floor, its walls covered in canvas and charcoal dust, the air thick with the smell of turpentine and possibility. Life had, impossibly, found a new rhythm. Aiden was back at NYU, this time on a legitimate scholarship. He'd come home every Friday for dinner, his backpack full of laundry, his mind full of macroeconomics and complaints about the dining hall. He was a normal college kid, and every time I looked at him, my heart ached with a gratitude so fierce it was almost painful. And me, I was no longer an asset. I was the founder. The Second Light Foundation, a name I'd chosen with care, now occupied a small, rented office just a few blocks away. We, a small team of a social worker, a paralegal, and myself, worked to provide emergency housing, legal aid, and art therapy for women and families escaping abusive situations. It was grueling, heartbreaking work, and it was the first thing, besides my art, that had ever made me feel whole. Our funding was secure, thanks to a single, massive, and entirely anonymous donation from a private New York benefactor who just happened to share a lawyer with Lorenzo DeMarco. Lorenzo's name was nowhere on the paperwork, but his promise was in every brick. He was pulling away. I could see it. He was still the boss. That world didn't just let you retire, but he was delegating. Nico. Now his official underboss handled the day-to-day operations. Lorenzo was extricating himself, one careful, deliberate step at a time. He was untangling his finances, legitimizing his investments. He was trying to build a new empire, one that didn't require blood to function. He still carried a weapon. I would see the perfect line of his holster under his cashmere sweaters or his hand-tailored jackets. He was, and always would be, a dangerous man. The world he lived in demanded it. But the rage was gone. The man who had watched me in the restaurant, his eyes like cold, dark stones, had been a man haunted by his sister's ghost, driven by a penance he could never pay. The man who visited my brownstone now, he was different. The weight had lifted. The anger had receded, leaving behind a man who was quiet, watchful, and surprisingly profoundly gentle. He visited often. He never came unannounced, always calling first, a formality that I found both absurd and endearing. "Eva, I'm in your neighborhood. Do you and Aiden need anything for dinner?" He would arrive, not in an armored sedan, but in a simple, dark Audi. He would bring groceries, not just staples, but specific things. The expensive olive oil I liked, a specific brand of coffee he'd seen me buy, a bag of the sour, gummy candies Aiden was obsessed with. He brought me art supplies. He'd show up with rare, heavy stock paper from a specialty shop in Soho, or a box of German charcoals he'd had imported. He paid attention. And he smiled. It was still a rare event, that small, slow smile that Aiden had first coaxed out of him, but I saw it. I saw it when Aiden beat him at a video game. I saw it when he tasted my pasta sauce and pronounced it acceptable. I saw it when he just sat in my studio, watching me paint, his presence a silent, solid anchor in the room. He was a man learning, in his late 30s, how to be at peace. Then, I got the email. It wasn't a fake invitation to a trap. It was from the most influential contemporary gallery in Soho. "Miss Monroe, we've been following the narrative of your survival, but more importantly, the evolution of your work. We would be honored to host a solo exhibition, The Survivor's Gaze. We are proposing an opening in 2 months." My hands shook, but this time, it was not from fear. The night of the show, the gallery was packed. It was loud, bright, and suffocatingly warm. People I didn't know, critics, collectors, other artists, and women from the foundation were all crammed into the white-walled space, sipping champagne and looking at my soul. My art was not the quiet, pretty watercolors Brandon had collected. It was raw. It was a triptych of a hand in charcoal showing the signal. It was a massive 8-foot canvas of a shattered car window, the glass rendered in shards of resin. It was a dark, abstract portrait of a man on a balcony, a shadow of protection. My work was angry, and it was hopeful. It was the story of my survival, told in paint and charcoal and shattered glass. Aiden was my date, looking impossibly handsome and awkward in his first real suit. He held my hand, beaming. "This is insane. Eva, they're crying at your paintings." "It's a lot," I said, my voice tight. I scanned the crowd, my heart thumping. I told him about it. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm proud of you. Eva, that is a great honor." But he hadn't said if he would come, a man like him, in a public space like this. It was a risk. The gallery owner was pulling me toward a famous critic from the Times. I was smiling, shaking hands, but my eyes kept darting to the entrance. And then I saw him. He wasn't making an entrance. He had slipped in, quiet as a shadow, and was standing in the back, behind a large sculpture, half hidden in the alcove by the bar. He wore a dark, simple suit, no tie. His injured arm, now just a map of faint, silvery scars resting on the bar. He was not the boss. He was not a patron. He was just a man. He was watching me, his gaze so intense, so full of a pride that was almost painful to look at, that the noise of the room faded to a dull roar. He saw me see him. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just raised his glass, a tiny, fractional movement in a silent toast. You did this. My heart settled. He was here. He was my anchor. I turned back to the critic, and this time, my smile was real. The rest of the night was a blur. My art sold, every piece. People said my name with respect. They called me an inspiration. When it was finally over, when the last of the patrons had drifted out, I was left, exhausted and vibrating, with Aiden and the gallery owner. Aiden was being picked up by friends. He hugged me tight. I'm so proud of you, Ava. Seriously, you're a rock star. I'll see you Friday. Don't let your head get too big. I laughed, swatting him. I watched him go. And then I turned to the owner. I'm just going to walk, I said. I need some air. Of course, my dear, a triumph, an absolute triumph. I stepped out of the bright gallery and into the cold, sharp November night. The city air felt like a balm. I walked 1 block, then 2, just breathing. Your work is loud. I stopped, my heart leaping. I turned. Lorenzo was leaning against a lamppost, his hands in his pockets, the shadows playing on his face. He'd been waiting for me. Loud? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It's not polite, he said, pushing off the post and falling into step beside me. It makes people uncomfortable. It's good. We walked in silence for a few blocks, our footsteps the only sound. It was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who have nothing left to prove to one another. The critic from the Post, he said, the one in the red glasses, he's a fraud. Don't listen to a word he says. I laughed. How do you know? He owes my family money from 1998. His opinions are for sale. Good to know. I said, and the music? What did you think of the music? It was terrible, he said flatly. Sounded like a dying cat. It was experimental jazz. Lorenzo. It was terrible. We were talking about nothing. We were talking about music and critics and the chill in the air. We were talking about Aiden's midterms and how I was struggling to find a good accountant for the foundation. It was so perfectly, beautifully normal. It was the one thing I had craved more than freedom. We reached the stoop of my brownstone. The street was quiet, the windows of my house warm and glowing. This was the moment, the hesitation. He stopped at the bottom step. This was his move. He was still the man who lived in a fortress, my home, my life. It was a foreign country he was afraid to invade. Well, he said, his voice a little rougher than usual, you should get some rest. It was a night. It was, I agreed, my hands deep in my pockets. He looked at me, his gaze heavy. Good night, Eva. He turned to go. No, I said. He stopped, turning back. No? I walked down the 2 steps, stood directly in front of him, and took his hand, his large, calloused hand, his left hand, the one that was scarred, but whole. No, I said again, my voice softer. You are not going back to your empty penthouse tonight, and I am not celebrating this alone. I tugged his hand. Come inside. He stared at me, his dark eyes searching my face. And then I saw it again. That small, slow, breathtaking smile. Okay, he said. I pulled him up the steps. Fumbling with my keys, he was right behind me. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and led him into the warmth of my living room. The house was quiet. Aiden was out. It was just us. I turned to him in the entryway. The light from the street lamp cast a warm glow over us. You came, I whispered. I told you I was proud of you, he murmured. I put my hands on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart under his suit. You are the entire reason I'm here. You, he said, his hands coming up to cup my face, are the reason I'm here, in this brownstone, smelling like turpentine. I laughed, a sound that was half a sob. He was here. He was safe. I was safe. I rose on my toes and kissed him. It was not the desperate kiss from the farmhouse, born of fear and adrenaline. It was not the raw, healing kiss from the penthouse, a promise before a war. This was a kiss of pure, unadulterated joy. It was clumsy. My hands were in his hair, and his were on my waist, pulling me tight. I was laughing against his lips, and he was, too. A low, gravelly rumble in his chest. We were clinging to one another, two survivors who had finally reached the shore. "God, I've missed you," I murmured, burying my face in his neck, inhaling the clean, sharp scent of him. "I am right here," he said, his voice thick. He pulled back, his eyes dark with an emotion that was no longer just pride or protection. It was a deep, quiet, steady love. We didn't go upstairs. We didn't need a bedroom. We needed this. The living room, the heart of my home, with the couch I had bought and the rugs I had chosen. His hands were gentle. His suit jacket came off, dropped on the floor. His hands, his strong, scarred hands, unzipped my dress. He didn't rush. He turned me around, his lips brushing my shoulder as the silk pooled at my feet, leaving me in my slip. He turned me back, his gaze reverent. He was looking at me, not as an asset, not as a victim, but as his... "You are so beautiful," he whispered, his thumb tracing my collarbone. I reached for him. I unbuttoned his shirt, my fingers tracing the scars on his chest, the puckered, healed tissue of the bullet wound on his shoulder. My bullet wound. I pressed my lips to it. I kissed the scar. He inhaled sharply, his hands tightening on my waist. I pushed the shirt off his shoulders. I found the long, thin, silvery line on his forearm, the wound I had stitched in the firelight. I kissed that, too. He was a map of the violence we had survived, and I was not afraid of it. He lifted me, his arms strong, and carried me the 2 steps to the couch, laying me down on the soft cushions. He moved over me, his body a familiar, welcome weight. "Ava," he breathed, his forehead resting against mine. "Lorenzo," I whispered. It was a slow, careful exploration. It was gentle. It was 2 people, scarred and healing, who were terrified of hurting one another and desperate to feel. His touch was hesitant, not with uncertainty, but with respect. My hands, which had been so afraid, were now brave, mapping the muscles of his back, pulling him closer. It was a rising passion, not a firestorm, but a deep, glowing hearth. It was skin on skin, the slide of his warmth against mine. It was a quiet, breathless language of safety. There was no fear. There was no shame. There was only the rightness of this moment, a joining that was so much more than physical. It was a sealing of our souls. He moved within me, his rhythm slow, deliberate, his eyes locked on mine. He was watching me, gauging my reaction, making sure, even now, that I was safe, that I was with him. I arched to meet him, my hands gripping his shoulders, a soft cry leaving my lips. It was not a cry of fear, it was a cry of release, of arrival. Later, we lay tangled on the couch, wrapped in an old quilt. The room was dark, the city silent. My head was on his chest, his heartbeat a steady, strong thump, thump. Thump beneath my ear. His good arm was draped over me, his hand resting on my hip. We were quiet for a long time, just listening to the sound of each other's breathing. "You followed me," I said softly, my voice muffled against his skin. He didn't answer right away. I felt his chest rise and fall in a long, slow breath. His hand stroked my hair. "You were in that restaurant," when I continued, "and you could have just looked away. Everyone else did. My whole life. Everyone looked away. But you followed me." I tilted my head back to look at his face in the dim light. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. But he was seeing that night. "I know," I said. "You saw Maria." He turned his head, his dark eyes finding mine. His expression was soft, the last of the shadows gone. "At first," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "But then I saw you at the gallery. You were so terrified, but you were still fighting. You were still protecting your brother." He reached up, his fingers gently touching my cheek, where the branch had cut me, where the last of the bruises had faded. "I didn't see a signal, Eva," he whispered. "I saw you." The words settled into my heart, the final missing piece. He hadn't saved a damsel. He had seen a warrior. He had seen me. The final scene is a snapshot, frozen in my mind. It is 2 weeks later, a Friday night. The kitchen of my brownstone is warm, the windows fogged from the steam of the boiling pasta. The room smells of garlic, basil, and roasting chicken. Aiden is at the kitchen island, arguing with Lorenzo about a basketball game, gesturing wildly with a piece of bread. Lorenzo is leaning against the counter, his arms crossed, a real, full-bodied laugh rumbling in his chest. I'm at the stove, stirring the sauce. I look over, and my heart just stops. Aiden, Lorenzo, laughing in my kitchen. The two halves of my life, the light and the dark, the past and the future, fused into this one, perfect normal moment. I bring the food to the dining table. We sit, we eat. We talk about school, about the foundation, about the ridiculous price of coffee. Aiden tells a bad joke. I groan. Lorenzo laughs again. The light is warm. The food is good. I look at Lorenzo, this man of shadows, who took a bullet for me, who brought me back to life. He meets my gaze across the table, his eyes full of a quiet, steady love that is as necessary to me now as air. I reach out my hand. He meets it, his fingers lacing with mine, his calloused palm warm against my own. We are sitting at the table, in the light, and I am holding his hand. I am, at last, completely safe. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Eva and Lorenzo. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment in English and let us know what part of the story touched you the most. We'd also love to know where in the world you're listening from. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. If you love stories like this, please consider subscribing to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories. For more content, we'll see you in the next one.